as Sharon has mentioned, I'm the Landscape Woodland Design Advisor for the Forestry Commission, and I'm based in the Policy Advice team. I'm the only landscape advisor currently, although we're just about to recruit a second post. In Forestry England, sometimes known as the Forestry Estate, there are another 5 landscape posts, some of whom are, I think, on the line this evening. And we have slightly different roles. I'm very much involved in regulation and advising the private sector for forestry and woodland creation. And the policy advice team is made up of a really good range of people, including ecologists, historic environment people specialists in water and climate change, marketing and business, and we're soon to be getting a national natural capital advisor. And the social forestry as well. And I'm in the cultural services team with social foresters that includes a planner and, in fact, historic environment person. So that's a very positive thing. I've been in post for 5 years, full time, and I'm nationally based across England. But I have links with Nicholas Shepherd, who's my counterpart in Scotland, and have useful conversations with him. But I also have established a landscape and woodland network group, which is with colleagues in Natural England, the national parks, AOMB, some local authorities, and it's the beginning really of extending a network to work more collaboratively and get sort of landscape support. But I also work closely with ecologists and historic environment in my cultural services team. They're 3 people and they're both new, but it's incredibly helpful because, of course, there's so many synergies. Okay, can people see that all right?
Yes.
First slide, excellent, okay. So I'm very pleased to be able to speak and in this very interesting debate, hopefully. And the reason I was keen is because of my role, but also I think it will enhance the debate if people know a few of the basics, and I can give you a bit of a feel of what's happening as I guess one of the key landscape architects directly involved in the woodland expansion, working for the Forestry Commission. So I thought it was a great opportunity. So unfortunately, I've had a few technical problems myself. So I've got rather a lot of slides, but I'm just going to flag up some issues that might kind of get your ideas going for the debate. So I've told you a bit about myself and where I sit. I thought it would be good to show you this slide, because it looks as if we do have a lot of room for trees when we look at our European context. Oh my goodness, what's happening here? Sorry. These are some of the issues I've been having, unfortunately.
I think you've enlarged the slide somehow.
Yeah, I have, and I'm not sure how that. No.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, I think this was the next one. Just thought it would be worth flagging up that foresters and landscape architects have been working together for a very long time. And this is obviously Dame Sylvia Crowe, who wrote a lot of books on woodland design. So I'm sure most of us don't need reminding of Sylvia, but there's also been a very significant number of books published on woodland design and in connection with forests. And I think a lot of our initial involvement was due to the concern of, if you like, monoculture plantations located in quite sensitive places that were largely abutting property boundaries, and they weren't at all well integrated into the landscape back in the 60s. So I think that is really the starting point of the concern. So that's really just a reminder of some of the early context. Okay, so as I've said, I'm in the policy advice team with, a very useful range of other people. So we work in a very interdisciplinary way. So part of my role is to promote guidance and develop best practice. And the key document that anyone who's interested in woodland expansion and woodland creation, the key document is the UK Forestry Standard that has been around for well over a decade and is currently being reviewed. And I'm very pleased to say Caris Swanwick, who's with us today, has had a role in that. I'm very pleased to say. So that is quite a long process. I think it's for about at least another year or so, but that's worth knowing about. So I also I collaborate a lot, as I've mentioned, with my colleagues in DEFRA, Natural England, the Environment Agency. I have done a presentation to the ICF, Landscape Institute. Also have quite a lot with the National Parks and AOMBs, and I have done some lecturing at academic institutions. So sort of increase the awareness of landscape students. But one of my key roles when I started was to modernize landscape analysis and design. And as I've suggested, our role goes back a long way. And initially it was very involved in the visual impact of forestry. And there were some early techniques, including things like visual force analysis, that were used to try and get people involved in the design of woodlands to respond more effectively to landform in particular. So a lot of that was in fact north of the border in Scotland. So one of my roles in particular is to look at the aspects of England that make, the diversity within England. And as you'll be aware, we've got 159 natural character areas. There are lots of different scenarios with lots of different woodland types, lots of different forestry, and we have a high population density. And in the current pandemic situation, I don't think anyone has, there's never been such probably a dependency and an interest in the landscape and in getting out and enjoying it and getting all the health and well-being benefits in particular. But also, of course, the big headlines that I neglected to say early on because they're so in front of our mind all the time, of course, is climate change and biodiversity emergency, and things like managing water. So, woodland really is, the woodland expansion is very essential in so many ways. But I think the important thing for us is that it does come with a certain amount of risks, because there's a lot of people, well, it has huge support, understandably, but it's very important in our quite special landscape that forestry and woodland creation is well fitted in and integrated into our landscape character, but also the detail of it, depending on what the objectives and the functions are, it's really important as well. So part of my role really is selling the benefits, embedding good practice and improving outputs. So this is a very simple sketch, just elaborating a bit more on what I've just said, really. The sort of 1960s productive forestry that had initial concerns. The visual force analysis that was focused on landform, encouraging, getting the shape right and better integration from that point of view. But in more recent times, that's all been recognised and utilised well. But there's also a kind of approach that's avoiding features within a site of interest and value. And I've called it disparate design. I think that is a term, that is a genuine term. But what we're trying to do now is more integrated, holistic design that is looking at the big picture, linking things together, thinking how you know, the economic value of woodland and forestry, how that fits in, where that sits within a site. Because in our sort of our landscape, it's very rare that you get a blank sheet of paper. There's so many historic assets, there's so much priority habitat, there's so many valued views, so much access. So we are dealing with a very complex scenario, which is why this incredible skill set of landscape professionals can really make a difference. And I think one of my key points is that fully acknowledged silvicultural experts, foresters, have got a really unique skill set as well. And I think we're very complementary. And in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, you know, a dream team, really. Landscape architects that work in a multidisciplinary way, that work with ecologists and historic environment specialists, you know, bringing together all these elements in a successful way, but also in a way that is very efficient, because I think there's always a concern with landowners and land agents and foresters that if you bring a landscape architect in, it's going to take a lot more time and add cost. But actually, I think a key point is that if it's done, if we do it in a good way, that's not going to happen at all. It's going to be very. I know you all know what landscape is, but I'm just really showing you this slide because I just want to emphasize something that's in the UKFS, the fact that landscape comprises of the aesthetic qualities, the natural components as well, including biodiversity, climate, hydrology, landform, the complex human influences, and also the all-important cultural values. So that's just a reminder. And you can see the landscape convention. Again, really important to highlight that it's nothing to do with the EU, but the fact that all landscape matters, in fact, and it's all valuable. Particularly as I'm sure with lockdown, we've all become more and more familiar with that the landscape on our doorstep is really critical for our health and well-being. I know I have. I'm sorry if there's these other things that keep appearing. I've just put this in. This isn't too far from where I'm sitting in Hampshire. This is Dorking in Surrey, in the South Surrey Hills, OMB. And I just wanted to show this because, you know, from some perspectives, you might think that we've got a lot of trees. We're very well wooded, and of course, the southeast of England is. But it was just striking to me that this is a landscape that's evolved over hundreds of years, millennia. It's all quite naturalistic. You've got all the palimpsest of the different trees. I can see, I think, Californian redwood are on the edge of a big house on the edge of Dorking. Just a reminder that you know, there's places like this where there's already a lot of trees and woods, and maybe it's quite a useful visionary photograph. At the other end of the country, this is the northwest. This is, I'm sorry, I think I've just lost, not sure how to get rid of, I've got a title block up there, but it's not the end of the day. This is in the Lake District, obviously in that, you know, well, one of our best loved national parks, but also a World Heritage Site. And just showing this really to highlight the value of our designated landscapes, how important they are, and really to emphasize how, you know, there will be a lot more woodland creation and there's a lot of space for new woodland creation, but in such sensitive and cherished landscapes, how good landscape design is very important here. So I've just included this this is another part of the Lake District, just to kind of highlight if you like, a big picture or landscape planning approach. But I've got, you see, just poking on the top left-hand corner, Spirit of Place, which is one of the forest design principles, one of the ones that probably to a lot of people outside our profession is a little bit harder to understand or apply. So I subtitle it as landscape, as local distinctiveness. But I think we're quite good at broad brush, you know, looking at a piece of landscape and identifying, well, classifying it and zoning it, if you like. And this is a very useful approach when considering new woodland and forests. What I would say is that we don't plan the landscape and where new woods are going to happen to any great degree. We have opportunity mapping in the Forestry Commission, but largely applications come in, and in fact I look at part of my role is to comment on all cases, which at this stage is getting, it's very significant. So I thought I'd just add that to the discussion. I've put this in. This is in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, not too far from the Lake District, but I like this one a lot because it just highlights to me how important natural processes are and how what they not only are very important for nature, but I think from a human point of view, they're how you can sit back and you can work out why certain things happen. I think it's a really important aspect that we easily overlook in a more intensively managed landscape. And with one other thing I would highlight is the new woodland is, there's a real priority on large scale as well as multifunctional woodland. So in the ideal situation, there will be lots of scope for productive woodland, but also within that parcel, a lot more creative opportunity, hopefully, for how edges are treated, how existing elements within that landscape fit within a new forest, a new woodland. I put this one in just, again, because we're having a debate. It was one that caught my eye. I'm not particularly advocating it. I think this is actually Japan. But there's a lot of emphasis on conserving and enhancing our landscape character, which is, of course, is extremely important. But there are discussions about actually, in some places, actually sort of starting, not quite from scratch, but actually doing things that are are different and new. And I suppose in our drone, slightly not quite dominated, but you watch any TV program at the moment of celebrities walking around the countryside, and the amount of time they're looked down on reminds me of Burle Marx and how his, going back to my course, how the shape of his planting in Brazil was influenced by more increased flying around looking down. I put this in because woodland creation, I'm generally hoping the debate's going to be peri-urban outwards, so very much so rural on the edge of towns. And this is one of the Woodland Trust's very new and extensive woodlands on the edge of St Albans, north of London. And it's phenomenally popular. My sister lives very close by and uses it every day. It's huge. It was previously arable farmland with a few ancient woodlands on it, but it is heaving, actually. It's massively popular. But I was lucky enough to do, working with the Woodland Trust, do a 10-year on analysis and look at strengths and weaknesses, or make some comments. And one thing that I think this photograph illustrates slightly, there's the ancient woodland there in the backdrop, and then you've got the new woodland in the middle distance, and then you have got a really good open space system, but they're all quite, there's not a lot of interlock, actually, is a term used in forestry. You've got quite sort of sharp edges, and then you've got short grass. And I feel that, for community woodland or getting people a lot more connected to nature, there's a lot of scope that landscape architects, the imagination landscape architects can create places that, actually lift a bit more uplifting. And there's lots to say about this scheme. It's, as I say, it's hugely successful. And the Woodland Trust have been very interested in looking back over a 10-year establishment period and how it can be improved. Okay, this is just another same location. A second. Okay, it's just a series of images just showing how even hand-drawn sketches can be very useful. 3D taken from photographs can be very helpful in explaining to all concerned with a new forest ideas and developing a design. In this case, this photograph and this image was taken from a long distance cycleway and footpath across a valley with priority habitats, or the River Tyne Valley with priority habitats. But just before you got to the big slope with the big opportunity for productive woodland, there were a series of smaller landforms, and they picking those out makes an excellent transition between a priority habitat and semi-natural habitats and the productive woodland beyond. So this is a plan of the same area. This is actually a design concept plan that's part of the requirements within the Woodland Creation Planning Grant and UKFS. So again, it's just picking out the key zone. This is a 200 plus hectare site. So it's picking up the key constraints, if you like, and it's intended as a drawing for engagement. So it highlights things like deep peat, where you're not going to be planting trees. It highlights the river corridor and the priority habitat. It also highlights that zone, that transitional landform that forms such a good edge to that productive woodland. This is another example where you've got a view from a public bridleway looking across a mire, priority habitat that won't be planted, but beyond that you have kind of low hills with bracken and grazing land that is very suitable for woodland creation. But I was just keen to emphasize how the existing vegetation just on the edge of the mire and on the side of the hills, existing naturally regenerated vegetation, naturally marks a very good edge, rather than coming right down with the productive forest right to the edge of the mire itself. So the value of good edge design, whether it's planted or you're retaining some natural regeneration, that's not only important visually, but that's so important for the nature recovery, and the visual character. This is site sketch appraisal. So I was telling you that there was quite an emphasis on external views into woodland when designing, but because so many of the sites have many important landscape assets, an appraisal of the site is critical. So we still have the landscape context appraisal, but it's important to go into the site as well, and that helps shape the woodland. Okay, so I just really want to emphasize what it says in the UKFS in terms of woodland design. And the three headlines really are and requirements in the UKFS, understanding and responding to the site and its settings. So that is often undertaking a specific and informal landscape and visual appraisal or assessment. So that's the area where landscape practitioners could be particularly useful. There are also a set of 7 forest design principles that I will highlight shortly. And they're tried and tested, if you like. They've been around a long time, but they are quite visually orientated. But it's important they're considered in the design process with the landscape context. And the third thing really is this forest design process, which is very much based on a landscape design process. So it's integrating and iterative in a logical, clear, and efficient route to woodland creation. All right, so these are the 7 forest design principles. A lot of them are quite self-evident, actually. But spirit of place I subtitle with local distinctiveness, as I've said, and unity I tend to refer to sometimes as a landscape fit. And I put those 2 at the top because if you get those right from the word go, a lot of the other aspects kind of fall into place. So this is this is a working drawing. I've had an input into the Forestry Commission's Woodland Creation Guide, and this isn't quite completed, but it is a little bit more of an explanation of the process, going from survey through analysis to synthesis and finalization. Thought I'd just highlight why I think the landscape profession is so important to this current woodland expansion. I suppose, yeah, this is going to be one of the more significant landscape changes in our lifetimes, without a doubt. And yeah, it's really important. There's so many objectives. Woodland creation is needing to fulfill so many objectives. It's very complicated, and it's about our landscape and our landscape heritage, which in itself has a huge economic value for many reasons. So again, working together between foresters, land agents, landowners, and landscape professionals, with the wider team of the usual people involved, I think it could make a huge difference. So why we're a little bit special is we do understand the landscaping processes. We naturally take an integrated sort of big picture approach to working in multidisciplinary teams. I think that's fair to say. At the end of the day, we are designers, landscape designers, skilled at resolving complex landscape issues, meeting sometimes competing objectives, and we have our tried and tested tools and techniques, and we're about achieving balance, which is so important. And we do have expertise in communication with visual material, and we're good at fine-tuning designs. I'm just going to flick through a few more, not too many more to go. I just feel personally that authenticity, well, this is debatable, but semi-natural landscape has a lot of value for nature, but also I think for us as well. And there's great schemes happening, and this one I kind of picked up the fact that there was big chunks of white willow on dry chalkland. I'm surprised it looks so healthy actually, but not in its normal setting. And then there were very significant swathes of wayfaring tree on chalk. So the soil was right, and for wayfaring tree, but it's rare, very rare you'd actually see that in a natural situation. Does that matter? That's something to debate. But in terms of authenticity and local distinctiveness, spirit of place, I think it does. Coming back to Hartswood in St Albans, I was using, in this case, a section to just illustrate to them some of the approaches to improve the woodland for people in particular and wildlife, so that it was getting to the stage after 10 years that, because it's such a large scale and it has a very flat plateau on top, it's beginning to feel quite secluded, and navigation can sometimes be a problem for people that aren't very familiar with the site. So the importance of retaining views to local landmarks, creating, using different tree species to create distinctive hubs and nodes within that woodland, little things like that. This is going back to the north of the country. I'm afraid we're jumping around a bit, but there's quite a default response to planting trees along riparian corridors, which in many cases is absolutely the right thing to do. But in this case, that was up in Cumbria actually, there was quite a high energy watercourse, but along the steep slopes there were it was very incredibly diverse mosaic with some bare ground, natural regeneration, and so retaining these important corridors that are for people, there's public footpath systems, and for wildlife, and just that sense of naturalness, I feel like is important on the large scale, but also to get that transition between more productive woodland on the rich soils, to get a planted, maybe semi-natural character with unevenly spaced trees and so on. Can't see the title here, but this isn't in Britain. This is just to the south of Paris, in the forest of Fontainebleau, which is a very huge ancient forest. I don't know how many people might know it, but I'm a very keen bird watcher, and I go there on a regular basis. But the reason I'm showing this photograph now is that it is showing a large scale forest, and you've got a large scale open space in the middle of it with lots of diversity on the edges. In fact, the 7 design principles can be sort of demonstrated in this photograph. So it's this idea of visioning what new areas of woodland could look like and what the benefits would be. This isn't that, a lot of people look at this and think it's the New Forest, so we do have a very familiar precedent. Okay, I imagine I'm coming towards the end of my time. What I'd like to say is landscape is about the big picture. It's about integrated design practice. It's, after all, it's about inspiring great places. So, with this woodland expansion, it's absolutely essential that that landscape professionals do have an effective input. Just to reiterate, understanding the landscape context is UKFS requirement. Applying the design principles is as well. And the design process is really an essential tool. So working with foresters for multifunctional woodland, I think, is an excellent idea.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Richard. I think that Edward is back online now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're very pleased to.
Well, I won't say anything. Sharon, that's brilliant to be able to talk to you. Now Sharon is going to be the chair and host, really following the presentation of Richard's ideas. We sort of program for, say, 45 minutes of just an open discussion. This will all be recorded, so if you don't want your face to be seen or your voice heard. So handing back to Sharon for then a general discussion about Richard's points he's made. Thank you.
Thank you again, Richard. That was really interesting and very holistic. Now, we've already had a lot of activity in the chat, and I wonder if I might, first of all, go to David Shacks. David, are you there? And could you please turn on your microphone and your camera?
I'm here, Sharon, yes.
Thank you. Would you like to say where you're from? I should have said that. I do apologise, David. Perhaps you could just say where you're from and what your job is, and then raise the point.
Yes, it was great to hear the landscape skills being promoted there. But can I ask, how many landscape architects does the Forestry Commission actually employ?
Okay, I'll answer that. Yeah, hi, David. Richard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, we're just recruiting a second post equivalent to mine in the Forestry Commission. So in a month or so, it'll be two people, but there are 5 in Forestry England. And
if you're going to transform the English countryside, is that going to be enough?
Well, that's precisely why this debate is so important, because there's lots of opportunity, I think, for the landscape profession to get far more engaged in all this work. But that's why that's why I'm particularly delighted Sharon is with us today, because what I was going to say is I think the landscape profession needs to highlight the particular skills to the forestry sector and the woodland, and if you like, the woodland creation sector. That would be, for example, the Woodland Trust. So that's the way forward, because there's not going to be a huge number. I don't actually design woodlands. I just give advice, and I often do design sketches as a way of, communicating and informing land agents, foresters, fellow woodland officers. There's also a tier within the Forestry Commission between the woodland officers and myself in the policy advice team of woodland creation officers. So they directly communicate with landowners and land agents. And in the policy advice team, we're asked to comment on schemes. And they're, if you like, an intermediary. But they are, they're learning a lot, and they're very positive. And when they see the outcomes, I mean, there haven't been many schemes with external landscape architects, but people generally are very positive when they see them, and they see the value of. But I think it needs, it needs something more significant, quite a sea change, to be honest. Which is why, I was, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about some sort of event with the ICF, between the landscape professionals and the ICF, for us to really explain and highlight our, the benefits. And I think the bottom line benefit is the fact that we can do an excellent job and, in an efficient way, and save on costs and time, but also from the point of view of engaging with the public. There is a risk, and there have been occasions in the past where, communities and people are not happy with the pace and the scale of landscape change. So I think it makes sense from both points of view to work more closely together, because, we're talking about, unlike a lot of countries in the world, and their forest resources and woodland resources, we are talking about, after all, largely plantations. And I think because we are a very populated country, people are really interested. They notice these things. So I think what I would like to see is this is a bit of a turning point. Well, it has to be a turning point, and the new forests and woodlands have to be very well designed, meeting multiple objectives. And I think landscape architects and planners are the profession that can, do that extremely well. That's what we're about. So I hope that's answered your question.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to our next question from Jay Ning about ecotourism. Jay, are you there, please? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am here. My name's Jay. Thank you for the introduction. I am from Cheltenham, but my company that I work for is based in Malmesbury, Wiltshire. We're a multidisciplinary practice, and we work with ecologists and arboriculturalists. My question was, will the Forestry Commission work with local businesses to incorporate ecotourism into productive woodlands? And would they also encourage different types of productive woods, such as oak and beech, as well as our standard pine forests?
Shall I answer the question?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. When we say productive woodlands, that doesn't just mean, productive conifers. Oak and beech could well be productive woodland. But one thing I didn't mention, and thanks for prompting me really, is with climate change, there's a whole new suite of emerging productive tree species that will become more familiar in the English landscape. And again, I think that's an important issue because, for example, in the south of England, where the climate's obviously more mild, species like Californian redwood, giant sequoia, eucalyptus, some of these trees that we currently associate more with gardens or around stately homes are going to be viable, productive trees. And I think particularly in designated landscapes, there's, the skills of a landscape architect to help integrate those kind of woodlands into highly valued and cherished landscapes is going to be very, very important. Because people are going to notice quite a big change. The other thing I would say is we're regulators, so you may ecotourism and so on. There's there's a lot. I know my colleagues in Forestry England have a lot to do with that, but we have social foresters. I'm in a team with social foresters that do very much encourage access to new woodland and social enterprises connected with woodland and things like forest school. And then we have planners. We're working on it.
Absolutely.
So there's I think the good thing about your question is it flags up this is a very complex.
Yeah, no, I understand. It was a very big question to ask.
No, but I appreciate you asking. So it's a lot bigger than just about what woodlands look like. It's how they fit in the landscape, how they function. But I think, again, pushing the skills of landscape architects, we're not just about how the visual aspects, we're about the functioning.
Absolutely. I mean, it's to do with like helping the UK economy as well. Like we have so much materials being exported, then why can't we have sustainable woodlands where we can be productive?
Well, that's definitely that's definitely what it's about, but good design helps massively on that front to integrate it into sensitive places. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Would anybody like to chip in on that point? If not, I'll go to our next question. Okay, so our next question is from Tom, and it was a really good point about timelessness of design. Tom, are you there? Could you kindly turn on your microphone and camera and tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
I did make a comment. I didn't actually intend to ask a question, but I will make my comment. I did work, not for Sylvia Crow, but in her office, which was shared with the firm which is now Gillespie's at the time. And I was very friendly with her and often spoke to her about forestry. I mean, the thing that comes to me most often is her comment. She'd come back from a meeting with the foresters, and there are wonderful photographs of her standing on mountainsides and telling them what to do. And she said, well, really, he was a Sitka and be damned man. But the comment I made was that in the booklet, which Richard showed on the screen that she wrote on, forget the title, perhaps The Landscape of Woods and Forests, was it? Yeah. She called for, I think she called them forest design plans. And I think she would have been very pleased to see the kind of drawings that Richard was showing her, which just what she had in mind. And so my comment was, well done to Richard and the commission to reaching that stage. To take it a bit further, I do think that the multi-objective approach that Richard's emphasized is exactly what's needed for forests. What I'm not quite so happy with is a slightly revised version of the traditional survey analysis plan or appraisal in Richard's terms. Survey appraisal. I wrote it down. Yeah. There we are. Survey. Sorry. Sorry, I can't see it. But I'll make that into a question. I wonder, Richard, have you thought of developing that in the direction which in cities is described as a landscape urbanism approach? But it comes from McHarg, basically, with an addition from the French structuralists. And I think that would be very appropriate approach to forest design. I think that you've described a step in that direction. And I'm just saying, have you considered taking a further step in that direction, which I think would be a very good thing to do?
That's such an interesting question, Tom. Thank you for that. Yeah, in fact, it's not Ian McHarg. I've looked at, is it someone Kelly? I've forgotten the name. Another American. I know Ian McHarg was Scottish, but who who looks at this, this other chap has looked at the structure of cities that make them work well, you know, central places and edges and landmarks, all those kind of things. And I think that kind of approach is very relevant to large scale forests. You know, people need to navigate around them. They need to have the views that help them align themselves. They need space so they feel comfortable. They need diversity to encourage them on their walk that's human scale. So actually this is why it's so nice to speak to landscape architects on a bigger scale as well, because you know, I think with woodlands, I mean, the key point is, of course, we talk about woodlands as if it's one generic thing, but of course there's such a wide range of woodlands, but certainly woodlands on the edge of towns that are going to be very peopled, like Hartswood in St Albans. You know, it has to be very much designed around working for people and connecting people to nature, and also to some extent, you know, encouraging them to get off the footpaths, if you like, and sort of explore the wilder places, you know. And of course there's this role with natural colonization, potentially rewilding. But I think the key message about current new woodlands is they will be multifunctional, and they will have a big chunk of productive woodland that, you know, generates income, but it also functions well for people and wildlife. And I think to have a wider forum between the ICF and the landscape profession about, you know, the different suites and functions of woodland, and to get a better understanding and greater recognition of the benefits of working together will be good, really good.
Could I make a supplementary point, Sharon?
Of course, I'd love you to. This is a debate, so let's go for it.
Well, another comment first, that a couple of years ago, I followed the London Loop. I think it's about 150 miles around the outskirts, and it went through lots of areas of woodland, many of them managed by local authorities. And the standard of management was very, very low, extremely distressing and disappointing. The better areas were either run by the National Trust, which I think is very good at land management, or by the City of London, the City Corporation. They were good. That's the comment. But the question is, do you think it would be a good idea for the Landscape Institute to have a professional interest body for forestry? I think I've seen a comment in a Landscape Institute document that they're thinking about interest groups of that kind. And it seems to me that it would be really good to have one for forestry. And I wonder what you think of that.
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm kind of reaching out to, as has been highlighted, there's only 2 landscape professionals in the Forestry Commission. So therefore, it's really important to reach out to other landscape professionals doing great things. And the Landscape Institute have been part of that, and we've had recent discussions regarding the review of the UKFS document. So that sort of thing is happening. But the other thing I'll highlight is there's a whole new suite of grants will be announced, I think, later this month or in spring. And there's a real emphasis on bringing woodlands back into management. There will be grants, you know, significant grants. So that is a high priority in the Forestry Commission, not just woodland creation and protection of ancient woodlands, but also bringing existing woodland into good management. So that's a very positive change that we should start noticing in the next few years. I agree. I mean, any ideas you've got to work more effectively together will be very welcome, Tom.
Tom, I'm really glad you raised that point. Is this not a possible outcome from this meeting? It's lovely to listen and to debate, but we're really interested in having tangible outcomes. And might one of those to have some kind of working party between the Landscape Institute and the Institute of Chartered Foresters on this aspect between Forestry and Landscape Institute? I wonder if we might have a show of hands. I'm not quite sure how we can do this because I can only see, but I wonder if anybody doesn't like that idea, let's put it this way, please say so to me most bluntly in the chat, because if you do like it, then the Institute of Chartered Foresters, I'm sure, would like to speak to the Landscape Institute, and we could set up an inaugural sort of working party. Okay.
Terrific idea.
Right, okay, yeah. That's going in my Institute of Chartered Foresters notebook now. So not to take up too much time, thank you, Tom, for raising that. I'd like now to go to Hannah Griffin, who says, are there any plans to strengthen protection of woodlands? Hannah, if you're there, please kindly say a little bit about yourself as well as turning on all your buttons. Hannah, I can see you.
Hi, I'm a landscape architect based in North Wiltshire, just in the Cotswolds, and we've had some issues over the summer with a local landowner felling lots of trees, and including in a conservation area, but not having any enforcement, and also the Forestry Commission not doing anything about it either, even though it's clearly over 5 cubic meters of trees that were felled, and it just highlighted the lack of protection that exists for existing woodland, and also just a couple of other sort of comments in regard to this sort of government push for increased woodland. I think events like this are really good because obviously it's so complex, and there's just quite a few concerns I have about productive woodland, just thinking about how we're using timber in regard to biofuels and just how damaging that is, and that we really don't want to go down that route when thinking about climate change. And at the moment we're importing so much timber from sort of boreal forests in US and Canada and places like that, and just how damaging that is at the moment. And also paper, surely we should be using more recycled and using it more carefully and things like that. So just in terms of thinking of productive forestry, thinking about, you know, we do really need to reduce our use of timber, productive timber, and then also just the whole issue with creating woodlands. Obviously, I'm sure there's lots of people involved in it doing all these things, but just about creating these complex ecosystems. And I visited a woodland trust site recently, and there was just no understory at all. It was just kind of grass, and then there were adjacent grasslands that weren't biodiverse at all, and I don't think they quite caught on to like how important that would be to have biodiverse grasslands near to the woodlands and just the complex ecosystems. So sorry, quite a few points in there.
Do you want me to answer some of those, Sharon?
Yes, I'd like to say something about resourcing, if I may, but Richard.
Yeah, sure.
After you, Richard.
Oh, okay. Just, I mean, that's a very specific question you've mentioned about felling licenses. If you could drop me an email and I could send that on to the woodland officer, because that's a very specific question, and that's something that the Forest Commission do put a lot of effort into. So,
well, I suppose I'd ask, do you think the protections are adequate?
Well,
sort of bearing in mind that we, like the Woodland Trust, saying that we've lost 100 square miles of woodland in 10 years.
Well, ancient woodlands are, I think they had additional protection in the last MPPF, but in the Forestry Commission, there's a lot of emphasis on protection of ancient woodlands, and some of my colleagues in the Cultural Services team are currently looking at legislation regarding the buffering of ancient woodland, which is really, really important. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you say are really, really good points. And, you know, but they're quite complex points, but things are, you know, they're all very much on the agenda. But you're welcome to drop me a line and I could give you a bit more of a detailed response. But it'd be nice to hear what Sharon's point, answering your questions about the productive woodland side of things.
Well, actually, my point was on the legislation, Hannah, and is the legislation strong enough? Well, I would say it probably is. The problem is the resourcing of enforcement, maybe in the Forestry Commission, but certainly in local government where I used to work. And there's been so many cutbacks that there aren't enough enforcement officers or specialist enforcement officers who can deal with this, or maybe the political appetite within a local authority to prosecute. It's very distressing to hear what you said when the law is there and there are successful prosecutions, both under the conservation area notification and under the felling licenses. In fact, in the Eastern region, the Forestry Commission is extremely active. That's the only thing I wanted to add on that. Does anybody else want to discuss anything on this point before we move on to the next question?
Can I make a comment on productive woodlands, if that's okay?
Yes, please.
So my family own a woodland in Wales, and we can't find anyone to carry out the forestry work. We've been out to tender maybe 3 times now. We don't have a massive woodland, it's about 50 acres, but we're really struggling to find anyone to do it. And one of the wider problems when you talk about sort of materials and firewood and things, I used to work on various estates in the south of England, big forestry estates. And the only reason that a lot of it came back into management was because of an increased demand for firewood. And the value that added allowed a lot of areas like coppice, for example, to be brought back into management that wasn't managed before. So whilst it's a very difficult point, because on the one hand, we don't want to use wood for those things. We want to lock carbon away for longer. But at the same time, it's providing a really, really important revenue stream to actually allow these things to be managed properly. So it's a real kind of double-edged sword in a way, you know, where on the one hand, we need it to keep things managed. On the other hand, it's obviously a problem. And there's also an issue around this, I think, people here may know more than I do, in the New Forest, where they're looking at trying to take a lot of the commercial forestry out of turning it back to more native woodland. But the cost of that is, I think it equates to 70% of the paid forestry work in the area. So there's a massive problem for the few foresters that are kind of left there. So if that commercial woodland is taken out of use, then it's a huge issue for employment for foresters, which are already kind of in short demand. But again, it's kind of like they're going to lose the jobs there, but there's jobs elsewhere, but they can't travel. So there's kind of a lot of issues around resourcing and how these things are all going to be affected. So really, we need to kind of invest more in ways to make use of timber more effectively, and especially lower value timber. And I won't talk too much more, but a really good example is, I think, in Finland, where they've got a new biorefinery, which has been built, which sounds really, really sinister. But it breaks down wood and they can use it in lots of different forms, and they're using it for all sorts of different materials. So that's a really important one. They're even using some of it for LCD screens for computers, electronics, satellite parts, all of this type of thing. So there's a lot of different uses for timber coming forward, but we need this type of technology and investment.
Oh, sorry, can I just add a tiny bit? That's really interesting to get that perspective. And I've just been involved a little bit with construction declares, and the architects there were sort of talking about trying to have more timber framing and bringing timber into buildings to make their buildings more sort of carbon neutral. So that's sort of another area that's possibly going to increase demand. And also just the fact that we're importing so much timber at the moment, and it is coming from virgin sort of boreal forest, which is obviously an amazing habitat. So perhaps UK forestry can be sort of more sustainable than importing at the moment.
Well, that's what the UK Forestry Standard is about. It's the government response to sustainable forest management, which is, you know, an international agreement. So that's definitely why it's a good thing to you know, source our timber from this country.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And actually, there is a movement to actually use the timber that's felled on site as part of development within that scheme, albeit maybe for play or for ecology or for sculpture. I wonder now if I may bring in Jane Findlay, because Jane, we've had a little chat. We talked about this outcome whereby landscape architects, well, the Landscape Institute and the Institute of Chartered Foresters work together specifically on forest design. But of course, we are working together already, aren't we, Jane? Perhaps you'd like to let the debate, let the group know.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Thanks for inviting me to. No, we've been having a quick conversation in the chat box, but following the ICF conference, Trees, People in the Built Environment, we held a round table with, which was organised by the Institute of Chartered Foresters and other institutes, which included obviously the LI. And the debate centred on how we could collaborate in the future, moving forward, particularly as the problems that we're facing, there's no one institute that can really grasp the nettle and run with it. We've all got to work together. There's such big issues that we're all facing. Mm-hmm. And we had a really interesting debate. And it was all broadcast live, and the Landscape Institute's Greener Recovery paper was of great interest to the other attendees. But the outcome of all of this was that we've agreed that we need to work closer together. We all have something to offer. So we had the Institute of Highways, there's the environmental lot, there's the Royal Town Planning Institute. So we're all going to come together on a regular basis, and we're going to be debating some of these issues and to see how we can work collaboratively, because we've all got something to offer in this sector. But so that's the update on that, and we'll be meeting again in a few weeks' time, I think early May, and we're going to be actively looking at the run-up to COP26, where I think we can together make a really positive contribution. And of course, having a combined voice, I think we will get more like to be heard than if we all try and be heard separately. But my question that I would like to ask is, I chaired a really interesting session at that particular conference, where according to Ian Bateman, who is the professor of environmental economics, he suggested that the thousands, the millions of trees that we need to plant in this country shouldn't be planted in upland areas, but they should be forests and woodlands should be planted much closer and established much closer to where people live. So we should be looking at in city areas, greening our cities, retrofitting our cities with urban woodlands, and certainly on the outskirts. But we've seen a number of forestry schemes over the years, and I've seen it in my own area where the Black Country had a big urban forestry scheme, which a lot of money was ploughed into establishing it, but the management has been non-existent. It's been really sadly lacking. And my concern is, in the rush to plant trees, this will result in closely planted, unmanaged plantations of the future. Do you think more energy and money should be spent on longer term management of these areas for them to become more successful in the future? Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
Is that a general question? Do you want me to? I could say a few words on that.
Richard, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I think the first thing is the upland question. yeah, a lot of new forests are proposed for the north of England in particular, and upland areas. And what I'd like to do really is just to say that there's huge areas of designated land, special protection area for birds, sacks, large areas of peat. And as I say, I work in, if you like, a multidisciplinary team with the Natural Environment Advisor, and all those, there's a lot of no-go areas basically for woodland. So most of the woodlands are proposed for areas where there are benefits and lower sensitivities. And the other thing I would highlight is in terms of water management, there's a lot of interest in new woodland creation on the sides of sort of steep catchments above cities like Leeds, for example, and the upper air. So I think what it's all about is getting the right trees in the right place, or the right place for the right trees. And, you know, there's incredible uses for them, but it's, if you like, the landscape planning stage, and as you say, working together to make sure that, you know, the right trees go in the right place. You know, so I think, I mean, the other thing to highlight actually, of course, is, you know, farming practice, and a lot of the uplands are, you know, there will be quite a bit of landscape change in terms of what's viable, and so on. So it's you know, our landscape's always been evolving, and this is why I think good design and good landscape planning is so essential, because if you don't do that, you could be in trouble. But I certainly wouldn't say the uplands, but by any stretch of the imagination, apart from anything else, obviously land values are going to be lower in these sort of areas. So that's, you know, so there's a lot of economic reasoning. But I suppose the other thing to highlight, of course, is a lot of the uplands of England are designated. So again, another good reason why landscape architects should be involved to bring local people along and with proposals. The other thing I'd say about management, again, we've just heard from Sharon how, you know, unless there's some value in doing management and there's some return, it's always going to be a big issue, which for me is another reason why good design from the word go is so important. And I'm fully with you when you see, if you like, broadleaf sort of amenity and conservation type woodland, you know, is all planted at high density, same density, perhaps little species diversity. And, you know, for people that look more closely at woodland, we think, you know, well, actually that could be done a lot better. And so one of the things, I'm working on practice guidance, and integrating existing features into new woodland is one topic that myself and my new colleague will be focusing on. But the other really key area is edges, and how you can, you know, clearly if you want good gradual edges that are rich in biodiversity, and just more on a human scale, you know, eye level, the blossom, the fruit, just that diversity that you get on an edge of a woodland, on the edge of open spaces, you know, that a lot of that is about good design. And I think that's exactly the area where landscape architects very easily can add a lot of value. Sort of, you know, the structure of new woodlands, give them that spirit of place, relate to the locality, so they feel like each woodland is different and has different. So I think that's helpful, because I think you're highlighting in what both of your questions the value of a landscape input with forestry.
Thank you very much. May we go on now to Robin Gray? Robin, you had a question about plants. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Okay, right. Thank you, Richard, and lovely to hear Tom Turner and see some of my old lecturers from University of Greenwich still going strong. My question sort of follows on from a lot of the points which I can see in the chat, and it's really about the fine-grained nature of woodland creation. So I currently work in the Forest of Bowland, up designated landscape, AONB in the northwest, but I have worked in the southeast in a community forest next to London and Thames Chase, and actually they're both woodland creation project. There's woodland creation elements of both my jobs, but in completely different contexts. And I find that the agri-environment schemes, whether it's countryside stewardship or the new scheme, ELMS, is all very prescriptive based on landowners and farmers, but doesn't necessarily encourage some of this fine grain investment, say in recreation, or indeed wider in actually placemaking. It's really tricky to fit that into the prescriptive nature of agri-environment. So it's good to see that community forests are actually being invested in after a long period where they've not had any investment. But if we're really to embrace this health and well-being agenda, then it's not just about numbers of trees in the ground, it is about quality. And we can't get quality without the mechanisms, the funding mechanisms to invest in quality. So that's my sort of point and question, if you like. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. We've still got a lot of questions to get through, which is thrilling, really. Everybody's so engaged. But who would like to answer that point? Richard?
Well, fine. I mean, I agree with what you're saying there, Robin. You won't be surprised to hear. I think we are about the quality, and I think, you know, if you're talking about a large community forest, you know, it's broken down into different compartments, if you like, and there's always huge value, as we all know, you know, in entrances and along routes and in nodes within that woodland fabric to create that fine grain quality and diversity that both ourselves and nature really needs. So I think good design is about zoning a parcel of land in a, you know, relating to its existing character and putting the right treatments in the right places and do it in a balanced and proportional way. And I think you can achieve a huge amount that way. And I think what would be actually excellent is to get some really good case studies of really good practice in terms of design and implementation to demonstrate.
Does anybody else have anything to say on that point? If not, I'm quite keen that everybody has a voice here this evening. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question, which is from Jim, and it's about soil.
Hang on a minute, what about me?
Oh, sorry, I have got you down on the list. I'm sorry. I've got you in a different order. I beg your pardon. Would you like to go next?
If that's okay with everybody else.
Yes, please do.
My name is Helen Neve. I am a landscape architect, but I specialise in landscape management and ecology. I worked in private practice until the beginning of last year when I retired, but I still think like a landscape manager and I still think like an ecologist. So my question is in two parts, but the first part is the most important. We have, all these comments have come up about the complexity of woodland planting, forestry planting, the multi-purpose nature. And if we don't establish at the beginning, before the design work starts, why we're planting a woodland or a forest, I think everybody must realise that we're in big trouble. We have to understand what is the purpose and how we can incorporate as much multiplicity in output without coming up with a compromise. And quite a lot of the really good reasons for planting trees in whatever format, as clumps, as coppices, as forest, as woodlands, do not earn money. I used to go to Forestry Society meetings, and when it was getting a bit aerated, I used to say, well, what's the economics of it? And then everything would go completely quiet. Nobody wanted to answer that question. So we need to look at how we are going to pay for that. And I was very interested to hear Richard saying that he was looking at recruiting someone on natural capital, because I think that's going to be essential, that we need to adopt our returns in more than just this so-called productive woodland. I really think productive woodland must mean every aspect of how a tree earns its living. So I think that has to come first. And then Richard, I agree entirely, good design, working with managers will create better design. And establishing that management plan, that program in the longer term, not only to make sure that trees retain their role because financial circumstances change, climate change is inevitably a moving target, things will change and over the very long period of a woodland. But also if you are looking purely at design, and I hope people aren't looking purely at design, but at the complex holisticness. What will the tree look, the woodland look like in 10 years, 15 years? When will it be thinned? Where will it be felled? When will it be replaced? All these things about time are absolutely crucial to woodlands and forests, which are around for a very long period of time.
That's a really good point. And interestingly, in urban forestry, we're evaluating the value of trees also using the iTree eco studies, looking at all those values as well.
Yeah.
I think it's an extremely good point, Helen, about getting your objectives right and having the objectives that are sufficiently detailed, that they're meaningful and they influence how your design develops and so on. Rather than having, you know, too broad brush, they need to be fine grain, or at least you need to work to fine grain objectives.
I mean, to be honest, it's blatantly obvious, but it is extraordinary how often the management is marginalised. And I think that's a desperate situation. I actually ran a joint venture practice back in the 80s, forcing designers and managers to work together. It was hugely successful. We disbanded it later because it was becoming more normal for managers and designers to work together, but it still isn't an automatic go-to situation in my view.
Thank you. We are running short of time. I did want to get to Jim, who had a question about soil.
Yeah, it's Brodie actually. I've hijacked Jim's Zoom. Short question. Later in the year, we'll be having a debate about soil. Richard, I noticed you talked about hydrology being very important in design, but you didn't mention soil. So how much does the condition of soil factor into the Forestry Commission's design thinking and ultimately strategy?
Well, one thing I didn't mention, thanks for your question, is that within the UKFS, soil is one of the key 7 topics. So so that's the first thing. The next thing is there's something called ESC, which is Ecological Site Classification that the Forestry Commission have. And it's related to the changing climate, but also very much to the soil. So you can identify your site and it will come up with a checklist of tree species, both from commercial and native, of trees that will be suitable for that site as it is now, and as it, I think it's 2050 and then 2080. So that's the soil thing. Obviously, silviculturally is vital if you're considering yields and the commercial aspects of a woodland. So it is fundamental, as you're highlighting. It's fundamental to the good design. But in a way, I suppose I might look at that as being more of a silvicultural element of the design, as opposed to the more, if you like, landscape or integrated design approach, which is why it's so critical for us to work together. So, but I mean, on the other aspect about soil is coming back to the uplands where you've got steep slopes or where you've got areas where the soil, I mean, there is quite a crisis, I think, in soil in agricultural areas where there's a lot of arable and the loss of topsoils. So I think there's the other important factor with woodland creation is its value to conserving and improving soil. I think that's
okay. May I move on now to Jan Woodstrom?
Yes, you may. Thank you. I'm teaching at the University of Sheffield, landscape architecture, and one of my interests is in trees and history. And within that context, I very much like to sort of look at, well, I studied landscape planning. That's perhaps also something to say. That's what I started with. The context that what we are looking at, which is all very commendable, but what I sort of picked up here is that we haven't sort of addressed the larger scale, the regional scale, and I just wonder whether, in the context of sort of energy transformation and recreation ecology, economy, whether that we should be looking at it from that context.
Okay, so the first thing I'd say is the Forestry Commission is divided into areas, so south east, south west, West Midlands, north west, Yorkshire and north east, and then east and East Midlands. So there's area teams that are very well tuned into the regional issues, and but remember, we're a regulator and an advisor. We're not in a position where we do regional plans.
Is that something that should be revived and should be sort of,
well, we do,
because it has been there in the past?
I think it sort of happens in a slightly organic kind of way. For example, you know, the South Downs in the very south of England, right on the front line of climate change, you know, there's a lot of arable farmland. And, you know, that arable farmland, there's lots of intensive inputs of fertilizer and herbicides and so on. So there has recently been a large scheme, over 200 hectares, to create woodland in an area, an arable area of the South Downs, to balance. Well, there's a need for housing in the Portsmouth Southampton area on the edge of the Solent, and there's a high sensitivity, water quality sensitivity in the Solent. So by creating more woodland in the arable uplands, chalk uplands, they're sort of balancing, you know, that water quality issue. So that sort of does happen, and I'm sure DEFRA and Natural England have been involved in that, I'm pretty sure, with the Forestry Commission and the landowner and probably the local authorities. So I think that's an example where it, you know, quite a good example where it's happening.
But it is not. It is sort of a decision that is taken at an ad hoc basis. You know, the opportunity arises, rather than sort of, you know, what is our vision for the country? How are we going to envision this changed country, which it is going to be, you know?
Well, yeah, and I think you raise a really interesting and good point. Is that would be an approach that landscape planners would be right up there in getting involved with, and maybe that's something that we do need to investigate and see how we can work together with so many of our other colleagues involved in woodland creation. You know.
Richard Carris here. I've asked Sharon if I can chip in because I have to go in the next 10 minutes. But I've made some comments on chat, but which a couple of people have also replied to. But on Jan's point, I think we should remember that before the government changed in 2010, and particularly in the sort of late 80s, 90s, there was a lot of work done on strategic approaches to woodland creation based on largely on landscape character, but not only. And most of the community forests did work like that. The National Forest, to my mind, is still one of the best examples also, not only of having a strategic approach, but carrying it through. The trouble is, I think once we had a Tory government, it is just not in the nature of politics at the moment to have strategic approaches, unlike the Netherlands, Jan, where you come from, where it's accepted that that's what you do. We're way behind on that sort of thing, and I honestly can't see a way in which it's going to change at the moment, regrettably, because I do think it's needed if we're to get the right sort of solutions. But at the moment, I don't know where we can go with that.
Convince Boris.
Speak to Boris, yes. Maybe. Sorry, Richard, can I also just add, I mean, the other thing a couple of people have mentioned on the chat is about the UK forestry strategy. And as Richard mentioned, yes, I did do a bit of work on it, but it was literally a day's work at very short notice, just commenting to the team in Scotland who are dealing with it. And I mean, my comments were very much along the lines of trying to get the balance right between planning approaches and design. And in the old days when Simon Bell was around, I used to say to him that no amount of good design makes a forest in the right place, in the wrong place, right. And although I didn't say that in my response, it was sort of underpinning what I was trying to say. Because I do think at the moment there's quite a heavy emphasis, not completely, but a strong emphasis towards design. So those are the two things I just wanted to say, and I'll duck out quietly in 5 or 10 minutes. But Richard, thanks very much for your presentation.
Oh, that's a pleasure. Well, thanks ever so much for those comments. I think one of the issues with the planning and the design is that because it generally isn't planned, then the design is the only way to influence the new woodland, you know, because it is an ad hoc landowner kind of basis. But I think that's where hopefully we as a group can highlight the real importance of you know, a more planned approach. Because I think
we should also take Chris Bolton's point somewhere in the chat that local authorities are so bereft of landscape specialists now that it's very difficult for local authorities to get to grips with these things in the appropriate way, which is very regrettable.
Actually,
I would like to highlight. So I'd just like to highlight what good things are happening in Devon County Council with Mel Kroll working on a woodland and tree strategy that's landscape led. So it's but I totally agree. There's so few landscape staff in local authorities at the moment, which is a problem.
I think on that point, if I may jump ahead, Robert, you are definitely going to be after this one. Thank you for your patience. But because we just talked about Chris's question, Chris Bolton on depleted landscape architects. Chris, if you're there, please.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. In the chat, I've made reference to I think we're caught on the wrong foot, really, the landscape profession. We've got a huge contribution to make, but we've lost so many people in the public sector who are a linchpin in many respects when it comes to creating a vision, making things happen on the ground, helping to coordinate wider effort. The other thing is that we have many consultancies, perhaps, who have, lost the sort of skills that reflected in Dame Sylvia Crow's approach, but probably are better positioned when it comes to a wide range of other design approaches to woodland, creating woodland mosaics, planting in a peri-urban or urban context, and the role of woodland, you know, in places close to where people live, rather than necessarily in the uplands. So we're a bit out of kilter with the current situation. We need to get a bit more organised, I think, and do it through collaboration and partnership. It's not just partnership between the LI and the ICF, but it's also with the national agencies, the Woodlands Trust, NGOs, and with the private sector representation as well. So I would be looking for a much wider forum for us to make the sort of impact we need to make, and work with all the different contexts where woodland is applicable. True, there is no vision or landscape plan, as we landscape architects like to have. It is very opportunity-led. But there is an England tree strategy that's associated with the DEFRA 25-year environment plan. Those documents at a high level are saying the right sort of things, but no, there is no plan as to where all these millions of trees are going to go. But we do have the Northern Forest emerging. Just an example of where there's, an intent, an area of intent. But otherwise, these trees will be scattered across England. We have the national character area profiles that show how distinctive and diverse our landscapes are and how sensitive they are. So this is the profession that needs to show how, how the planting is carried out. As I say, I think we need to organise ourselves, and we need that wider forum to help us to do that. That's my main point, I think.
Yeah, I would just like to endorse what Chris has said. Certainly, very much so, the organisational aspect. But I'd also just like to say I do training courses from anything from half a day to a couple of days, and so I just wanted to highlight that for private consultants in particular that want to upskill their staff into woodland UKFS compliant woodland design.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to Robert Holden about rewilding.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Interesting this evening. The UK government does have a national policy, which is for carbon neutrality by 2050. The Climate Change Committee advises that we should achieve 17 to 19% forest cover by 2050 as part of our contribution to this. That if we are under-resourced, as I believe we are, both in terms of forestry education, in terms of implementation, management, and also the earlier point made by Hannah about enforcement, then we have, as a series of professions, should argue so and point out the government can't achieve its target unless it provides the resources or it provokes the resources in the four administrations and in the private sector. That's my bit.
Would anybody like to add or answer that? Well, that's a really good point. Thank you, Robert.
Could I just add an extra point regarding education? Because there's only 3 places you can study forestry at university level in the UK. Now, in 2005, the original committee that devised what are now known as the STEM subjects did include land-based subjects. And the RHS in 2013 pointed this out, but there was no response by the Landscape Institute, for example, although it was discussed at council. We just need to get our act together and point out we have only 30 years and the government won't achieve its target unless it does something about it.
Well, I'm sure we all agree. I've only got room for a few more questions, so I'm going to go to Merrick. We're very pleased that Merrick is here with us.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon, for chairing so well. And Edward, thank you very much for stimulating us all with this event. And a terrific welcome to Richard for his presentation. I just pick up 1 or 2 points that individuals have made. So the point that Jan made about regions. Yes, regions, I'm afraid, is a dirty word with the Conservative Party, but let's just put the Conservative Party to one side for a moment. We do have a wonderful opportunity because the elms that are going to have to replace the Common Agricultural Policy is now pushing the landowning and land management industry into producing estate management plans. So there's an opportunity for us to be saying that let the landscape character areas and national character areas set the framework for those management plans. And just to say a few words of optimism, we are actually trying in Hampshire an elm convener where we've got an advisory board, and I have the contract to deliver this. But we have an advisory board that includes the CLA, the NFU, Southern Water, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, CPRE, and all sectors of local government. And the idea is to try to articulate this public agenda at a scale that is directly relevant to individual farms and estates. So there is an opportunity. I don't want to go take up this meeting with giving you a great deal of detail about it, but if you'd like to email me, I'm very happy to share that with you. And it is beginning to move in the direction, Jan, that you were wanting to see, landscape planning at a strategic scale. The point that I'd also like to make, I think we as a profession spend too much time worrying about cosmetics. Really, character is determined by function. And I'm so delighted that Richard has majored upon the multifunctional aspects. But in his county, sitting in the middle of Hampshire, there's something like 25,000 hectares of derelict hazel coppice. Now, that's a huge wasted resource. And there's no real investigation into the old stand types. Alder car for clog making, or hazel coppice for enclosing sheep. Now, coppice actually, if you look at the profile of carbon sequestration, the uptake of carbon is actually at its most livid with a live coppice stool. Wow. And we really ought to be thinking about, and this has been raised before, how we can actually store that carbon from small wood management. For example, I'm not saying this is a solution, but I know in Europe, hardboard takes on different dimensions, and they use structural hardboard. So it comes in sort of 6-inch depths. Why aren't we doing more of that? Because of course, hardboard uses up to 80% of the tree, whereas structural timber only uses about 40%. So I think there's a huge new opportunity now for really focusing in on multifunctional purpose of woodlands. And then the point that Niall made about the health and well-being agenda. If we've got all this unmanaged woodland, which we have, I mean, in Southeast, 80% of our woods are not managed. That is a shocking indictment. I mean, that really, how can the government stand up and talk about new trees when actually the mismanagement of the resource that's going on out there is so significant? What about, I'm at my happiest, if I'm honest with you, working in woods and working with trees, and I won't go into that. But what about equipping our young people and getting them deeply immersed in woods from play? And let's face it, the state of childhood at the moment is quite shocking. But the transformation to the health and well-being of young people to involve them in woods would be absolutely of national importance. But then, what about that energy? I can't stand the sight of people sitting on bicycles in a room, wasting all that food. What about getting out there in the woods and forests? And I know, once people are empowered to become involved in woodland management, they will love it. And it will do, their health and well-being so much good. But our forests need people. They're devoid of anybody. I'm sorry, Sharon, I've gone on too long.
No, don't apologise, because absolutely brilliant points. And I'm so glad you raised a social aspect of being in woodlands and working with woodlands, and the confidence that people can gain from using hand tools and working in nature. And we have so many people have been sadly made redundant in time of COVID. let those people retrain into something to do with green industry and woodland management. And there are exemplar projects, which I'm sure you could all name, where communities are getting together and working in woods, planting woods, and the principle of, why don't we look after what we've got first before we say tree planting numbers. Forgive me, I am the chair that was out of order, given my view. But if I may move on to Sarah Long, who's waited very patiently about environmental net gain. Sarah, are you still with us? Sarah? I do apologise. It's just such a great debate. These are such nationally important issues that, of course, we've all got a lot to say. So I'm going to move on now to Melanie. Melanie, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here. Oh, hello, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces. Yeah, as I said before, I'm Devon County Council Landscape Officer. And thanks for the plug, Richard, for the Right Place, Right Tree project.
Very special project.
Oh, that's great. And so my question is about the UK Forestry Standard. If that's going to be the sort of the guiding Bible of woodland creation going forwards, and it's getting reviewed, I'd be really interested to hear what those who already work in the forestry industry, the landscape architects, Richard, I know Roger is here, there might be others I don't know, those who already apply the UK Forestry Standard and know it from cover to cover, how they think, given what's been said in this meeting, you know, some fantastic stuff being said about, you know, the importance of climate emergency, biodiversity crisis, the importance of landscape planning, not all of which are done by landscape architects. There's lots going on with nature recovery and natural flood management. The importance of good design, the importance of social need, you know, health and well-being, all of that mix. How would you improve the UK Forestry Standard going forward? Is it fit for purpose as it is, or does it need a radical rechange or just a tweak? Be really interested to hear what you guys in the industry already think it should be changed. And one aspect, you know, which I'm trying to promote is, you know, landscape led. You know, you have to work in a place, and that's the landscape, and that's where all those competing objectives, those multiple objectives, sort of melt into the melting pot. So should landscape be more upfront as the uniting concept? So Richard, what do you think?
It'd be nice if Roger's still around to hear what he has to say as well. But what I would say is that the process of reviewing the UKFS, I think it's at least another year. And I know Karis is probably gone now, but I was very delighted that she was able to make a contribution, even though it's for a very limited time. But we've also got Christine Tudor, ex-Natural England, who's very involved in landscape sensitivity appraisal and landscape character assessment. She's involved in the reference group. So there's already been two great inputs, and as far as I understand it, I will be consulted a bit further along the line. So it would be great if this debate has kick-started something really useful that could feed into the discussions about how the UKFS might change. So I think that's my response. And I see Roger.
Yeah.
Face, so it'd be great to hear what you think, Roger.
Yeah. So my name's Roger Wellington. I'm a landscape architect with Forestry England. I trained as a forester, and then I qualified as a landscape architect at the time when landscape was in the news. Forests were in the news because of being bad landscape in the countryside. So quite a long history of being involved in that sector. I think picking up, so I've got lots to say on this, but I'll try and focus it on Melanie's question, which was around the UK Forestry Standard. My take on it would be that it's a brilliant tool. I wouldn't personally change it. I think it is fit for purpose. I think that more often than not, it gets forgotten, both in-house and externally. I think landscape is often regarded as a burden by landowners. That why do we have to do all this work? Planting trees is good. Why are you making me do all this work? And landscape is one of those things that I guess the sector would probably like to make a bit easier. And I think if a landscape architect approaches a woodland creation scheme with a full LVIA, it's kind of, well, that's a big tool for such a relatively straightforward project. So I think there's some work to be done on streamlining that. But I do think that the UK Forestry Standard and the principles that Richard outlined in terms of scale, shape and landform and enclosure pattern and diversity, unity and the spirit of place, those are, that's really just saying what's the landscape character of the general area and how does a woodland fit into that landscape character? That's trying to put it really simply. That's what the UK FS is doing. I think it's a balancing act because not everywhere is the same as everywhere else. So some places are relatively straightforward and landscape isn't a big issue. It doesn't need a lot of work, and woodland planting will fit in pretty much even if you did it wrong. Other places, it's going to stand out really badly if you do it wrong. So it's very important that the time is taken to get that right. And so landscape character is a great starting point to identify where it's more sensitive, where it's less sensitive, and how much effort to put into the landscape bit of that whole jigsaw of woodland creation, of which some of it will also be heritage features or soil, as Richard mentioned, or ecology. And that's really where I think the landscape practitioner is able to assimilate all of these things to analyze the most important factors and characteristics and to bring that out in a plan. So it's not just about the visual impact or the landscape impact, it's about having the skill set to be able to analyze and design around each of those key criteria.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, everyone. I'm so sorry that we're running out of time. I couldn't get to everybody, but there's been such a great chat as well, which will be saved. This is being recorded, so thank you for being so engaging, so passionate. This is such an important time in history. And I'd like to now hand over to Edward. Thank you.
Sharon, thanks very much indeed. I must apologise for my technical hitches, which was all to do with non-updates of software. However, it's brilliant that Merrick could come from Perth Hospital and that Sharon, like an angel, fluttered down and took over from Merrick's role as being chair. You've been brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed. Well, I'd just like to say a few words just before everyone goes about what this project is trying to be, which is Landscape Matters. It was an idea which was formulated in November, the 23rd of November last year by a few of us. And what we really felt was we wanted to sort of blow air into the fresh air, into the intellectual discussion behind Landscape Matters, whether it was about ploughing or painting, poetry, or indeed flower arranging. We felt that the landscape had the unfortunate, it fell into the trap of being in all these different silos. So what we really wanted to do was to open up the discussion, to have a discussion so that poets could engage with ploughmen, literally, so that we could actually witness these discussions. So it seemed to be very important that it was open to anybody from any walk of life who was interested in this instance, trees. It also seemed to me to be very important that it was completely free, so there was no sort of money barrier between us and the energy which we were producing. And I suppose the really important point is that sort of trying to re-establish, why professions and institutions were initially established and perhaps it was to enjoy the friendship of people who share one's own interests. And because of that, it seemed to be very important that these debates should be open to everybody and everybody could contribute, and there was no hierarchy. So what we have on offer is this magazine, which comes, you might have seen the first edition, which came out on the 15th of January. We want to keep it quite sort of sharp, so maximum of 5 articles, written by people who really know what they're talking about, to have no political agenda, and they can be quite controversial if the author or authoress thinks they're appropriate. And I'm delighted to say that after our first issue, we've got a readership of 2,050. 80% of those are UK, 20% is from abroad. We've got readership in Canada, in 15 people in New Zealand, etc., etc., etc. And we very much want contributions from anybody who reads our e-magazine. We have got sort of guidelines which we would share with authors, but the whole point is to really enjoy the skills and knowledge which we all have as a profession. And for example, our next edition, which is coming out on the 15th of April, we've got an article from New Zealand on education in New Zealand. So we're trying to make this a sort of a free global magazine, which will be read by more and more people. So it'd be great if you felt like writing an article. So you just contact Brodie McAllister or myself via Landscape Matters magazine. This is it's called our 4th debate. We sort of had 2 sort of nursery ones, and then this is our 2nd sort of grown-up one. And I think it's very important, these debates, that we should have deliverables at the end of it. So the chat box, which we have, people who've made contributions to the chat box, that's just great. We will issue that, the transcript from the chat box to everybody, as well as the recording of this debate. The last one, which we had on GLBIAs, the transcription was about 26 pages, which is quite a lot. And maybe it's easier to digest just audibly rather than reading 26 pages. Our next debate is on environmental art. And I hope you will, and this we will advertise and send out a flyer. I hope you will attend that. And finally, but possibly the most important thing, we would like to have a party of Landscape Matter readers in the first Friday in September. Hopefully that we will be allowed to have parties outside, and this would be in Kennington in London. But we will make more, we'll tell you more about that near the time. But in essence, we just, the idea is to underscore the sort of potential of the dynamic friendships that we can all have by enjoying each other's company and understanding what we all do or like doing. So thank you very, very much indeed for supporting our venture, and hope to see you soon.